USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Game of the Week podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. An in-depth look at this week's top college hockey matchup and a preview of the other big games.
Welcome to the Game of the Week podcast for Thursday, February 20th, 2020. I'm Ed Trefzger along with Jim Connelly. This episode is sponsored by the NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Detroit, Michigan. For tickets, visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. This week's Game of the Week is one that is kind of a growing rivalry. Number 8 UMass is home and home with number 14 UMass Lowell.
And joining us this week on USCHO Game of the Week to preview this week's Game of the Week in his fourth year at UMass, Greg Carvel. Greg, you're coming off a bye week. I'm certainly sure that at this time of the year, coaches don't mind getting a little bit of rest time when you think of injuries and just the mental wear and tear that a season takes. How did you use your bye week?
That's exactly how we use it. I was excited for it. We played real well the weekend before. We swept Providence, and a lot of people said, well, I bet you wish you were still playing. But at this time of the year, we had some nagging injuries piling up, and that's exactly what we did. I think we're pretty close to back to healthy, except we will be without Mitchell Chafee this weekend. He is out for the weekend. That
is a rough loss. And you mentioned the Providence sweep, and that was a good weekend to get you back on track after a 3-5-1 January. And you closed that month of January with a couple of games against New Hampshire and a game against Boston College where your team just scored one goal over those three games. You ended up, unfortunately, with a tie out of that, still a 1-1 tie. But is that one of those things as a coach where you have to start playing psychologist as much as you do coach, where players are probably thinking that we're never going to score a goal again because, mentally you get such pressure on yourself because the puck's not going in the net?
No, I don't feel that way. I feel there's reasons why you don't score, and we weren't playing hard enough. We weren't playing poorly, but we weren't playing hard enough. And I told the team, when you guys played as well as you can, as hard as you can, the goals will come. I'm not worried about that. There's a reason why we're not scoring. And, after that, the UNH weekend and the BC game, we just looked a lot closer because for 2.5 years, we've never really worried about our compete level, and it just was starting to slip away. And so we attacked it with our team. We made them realize that we weren't competing as hard as we usually do. And then we got back to it at Providence, and then you start scoring again. So for us, it was an easy fix, an easy evaluation. And we realized that, our compete level was slipping. And I think part of that was we had a really difficult stretch. You played Denver twice, you played BC 3 times. Our record wasn't great. And then we played UNH, and their goaltender was standing on his head for 2 nights. But at the same time, you got to work hard to score. And against Providence, we found that again. And of course, John Leonard's a really gifted, skilled forward, and he single-handedly created a lot of offense for us.
Well, you just mentioned Leonard, Chafee, unfortunately without him this weekend, but a very talented scorer. And then Oliver Chow, all members of your junior class. They're your top 3 scorers right now. And I think 2 years ago, you and I had talked about, what a great freshman class you had. Obviously, Cale Makar and Mario Ferraro were part of that class. And sometimes it's easy to overshadow when you have a player like Cale Makar, some of the other guys in the team. Is this junior class maybe picking up and doing exactly what you hope them to do, despite the fact that, maybe the 2 best players aren't there, but the talent was there all along, and you're getting the production from this junior class?
Yeah, this junior class was our first recruiting class here at UMass. And I've said it. We realized early on this was a transformational recruiting class. It was a big class. It started out, I think, almost 13 players. So, but within that group, we believe we have 4 NHL players. You take Mario and Cale, who are already in the NHL, and then you got John Leonard and Mitchell Chafee, who have been 2 of the best forwards in Hockey East for the last 2 years. So if you have 4 NHL players in a recruiting class, that's going to make a big impression on your program. And then we have other very good players, like you mentioned, Oliver Chow. Matt Murray is, I think he leads the league in goals against average. So that's a hell of a recruiting class, and a lot of credit to Ben Barr and Jared DeMichael for putting it together.
When I look at other players up and down this roster, some of the names that I know you've talked to about, particularly in your freshman class, Reed Lepster, Cal Keepuck, they're all putting goals in the net. I mean, they're not even in the top 10 in your scoring, but they both got 5, 6, 7 goals each. It feels like this team might have the most scoring depth of your 4 teams. Is that correct? And how do you look at that depth as being something that's a major benefit?
Yeah, this is just our 3rd recruiting class. Cal and Reed Lepster are both offensively capable players. And I think as they mature and get stronger, more experience, they'll become good players at this level. But we went into this year feeling like, last year on a really good team, we had 2 lines that could consistently score. We thought we'd have 3 lines this year. And Cal and Reed playing that 3rd line for us. So we're just, Kale and Mario, as good as they were, they kind of helped us, shadow over some lack of depth and lack of experience in the program. And, this year, we feel like we've taken a step forward and that we have a deeper team. Our back end, we talk about offense. Every one of our defensemen on the back end has more than 10 points, which to me is always important to me, that you've got a group of defensemen that are offensively active and offensively impacting the game. And that helps your forward score points when your defenseman can score points.
Talking about goaltending, you mentioned Matt Murray from that great freshman class a couple years back. He and Philip Lindbergh splitting time, almost identical time in net, very close, almost identical numbers. That's kind of going against the tendency in college hockey these days, where something like a third of the teams have one goaltender with 90% or more of the minutes. What kind of differences do you find with having 2 goaltenders like this, and how do you approach who starts in net for you on a given night?
Well, last year, when they were fresh, Phil A was a freshman and Matt was a sophomore, I think we went the whole year trying to figure out which guy to ride. And the first half of the year, Matt carried the load, and then down the stretch, it was Phil A. And I think we went into this year again trying to figure that out, but it just became real obvious that these 2 goalies they're very similar. There's almost no difference between them in level of play, and I think they're number 1 and 2 in the league in goals against. They're both in top 5 in save percentage. So it's not really fair to ride one and not the other. And what we also found is that we basically split. They both get a game each weekend, and we're finding that we're getting more out of them when they almost understand, okay, I have one game. That's my job. Take care of the net tonight. And, it keeps both of them on edge. It keeps them competing. And, I think it's good for the team. Every night you get a fresh goalie who's ready to, he's chomping at the bit to be in that net. And, you take away the pressure of, I need to be really good tonight, or I don't get to play tomorrow. They just go into the weekend going, okay, this is my game. It's my responsibility tonight to be as good as the other goalie, and it's working well for us. You mentioned the recruiting job Ben Barr, Jared DeMichael have done, and I had a chance to talk with Jared a few weeks ago. One of the things he mentioned was that it is a real challenge these days, recruiting. It's getting harder and harder. How has UMass been able to recruit a high-level talent in Hockey East when you're faced against some of the traditional powers with the names like BC, BU, even Providence? Yeah, I think, our 4th year here, we've seen a gradual change. When we first got here, it was hard to get kids on campus. And 4 years later, we have, advisors calling us, asking us to take kids. So it's, we built a reputation of a style of play. And I don't think a lot of people recognize this is really a diamond in the grass. Like, UMass is a tremendous school. It's a great college town. We play in a great facility. We're building a $2 million locker room renovation. Like, we got a lot of good things going on here. BU, BC we don't really recruit against them. We're more against Providence, Northeastern, and Lowell. And UMass is kind of its own filter. We want kids that want to be here, and not many kids in Massachusetts grew up hearing about UMass. They've heard about the BU and BC and Lowell and all the success they've had for the last decade. We just want kids who want to be here and that fit our culture. And there's a lot of good hockey players out there, and we don't, like every other school, we do our best. You don't win every recruiting battle, but when we get kids on campus here, to see what we have to offer, the quality of the people in our program, and the standards we hold our players to, it clicks for the right kid, and those are the kids that we want here at UMass.
We're talking with Greg Carvel, UMass head coach, and this weekend I'll get into the game and the X's and O's in a second, but it's a game against UMass Lowell, and in the years since these two teams have both had a program that goes back to, I think, about 1995. Very rarely have both of these teams been strong at the same time, and this weekend both will be nationally ranked heading into this series. Do you, in your staff, do you feel that this has a sense of a rivalry? Rivalries usually need two very competitive teams, so maybe it doesn't have that sense. But do you have a sense that playing your sister school could be a good rivalry weekend?
I think so, for the exact reason you just said. I think this year we're two very similar teams competing hard for hockey's position and national position. It should be a rivalry. We're both the state schools. Both have programs that have kind of revived in the last decade, but at the same time, since I've been at in Amherst, we've not had much luck against Norman and Lowell. So, we've got something to prove. We know Lowell's going to be a desperate team after dropping 2 games to Northeastern that, they didn't necessarily get outplayed, but they just didn't win. And, this is desperation time. Everybody's fighting for positions, as I said, in your league and nationally. And I imagine that these are going to be 2 highly contested games.
You've looked at them on tape by now. What are some of the things that are concerns? What are some of the areas that you're going to have to be best in if you're going to come out with wins?
Well, the best teams have a simple style, and they're really good at it. And that's what Norm's, done it at Lowell. Teams play the same way every game, every night. And that's what, good coaches do. And then it's getting your players to compete. And that's always the difference. And, to be honest, I don't think we've always competed real well against Lowell, and that's probably more of a compliment to them than it is an excuse. And we're going to have to be ready to compete this weekend, because I said that they're going to be desperate. They're in a slightly more desperate situation than we are. But if we don't win these games, then we'll be quite desperate.
Well, it will be the Battle of the Bay State, the quest for the Commonwealth, whatever you want to call it. I don't think it has a really appropriate name at this point, but both UMass schools, UMass and UMass Lowell, they will play a home-and-home series beginning Friday in Lowell and heading back to Amherst on Saturday. Greg Carvel, always great to talk to you. We appreciate your time. Best of luck this weekend. And certainly there's a lot of great hockey left to be played, so good luck the rest of the way.
Thanks, Jamie. Good to talk to you.
That's UMass head coach Greg Carvel. We'll be back with more of the Game of the Week podcast after this from our sponsor, the NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Detroit.
This is the USCHO Game of the Week podcast from US College Hockey Online.
Every time you show up, every time you make your presence heard, whether you clap your hands or stomp your feet, lead the chant or join the chorus. However you choose to be a fan, you make the game. The NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th at Little Caesars Arena in Detroit. Visit ncaa.com/Frozen4 to get your tickets today.
Continuing with the Game of the Week podcast, I'm Ed Trefzger along with Jim Connelly, and let's start with the Game of the Week. It's a great weekend series in Lowell on Friday, at Amherst on Saturday, UMass and UMass Lowell.
Yeah, certainly it has, the makings of what could be a great rivalry. And they used to play this series for the Alumni Cup, and they've gotten away from that. There is now an all-sport cup that the two schools play against each other for. But when you really think about it, when UMass was up in two Cahoon's days and playing well, UMass Lowell was probably at their lowest. And over the recent years, when UMass Lowell was, heading to 5 straight hockey's title games, winning 3 of them, going to Frozen Fours, UMass was at its lowest. And now that Greg Carvel has this UMass team playing well, Norm Bazin's Lowell team has had a good season. They need to play pretty well this weekend and here on out if they're going to make an NCAA tournament. But this really feels like one of the first times this rivalry has had both teams playing excellent hockey. And it really should be one of the best weekends these two schools have ever had on the ice together.
Also in Hockey East, it's a Thursday, Friday home and home, and nobody has to travel very far. Number 6, Boston College, and number 10, Northeastern. Not just a pairwise battle, but a battle in the standings in Hockey East.
Yeah, I mean, we can say that about any game this weekend, almost in Hockey East, that everybody's battling for that positioning. It's such a tight race. But Northeastern, they're feeling pretty good about themselves. They win a bean pot. They sweep UMass Lowell last weekend. BC, they're playing fine. Their hockey, they've played good hockey, really down the stretch. That a couple of tough losses here and there for them, but in reality, they're playing excellent hockey as well. BC understands that they're in a position, if they win and they do well down the stretch, they will win the regular season title in Hockey East. That's the big question. Can they do it? Can they keep pace with UMass? At this point, I feel like BC maybe missed out on a few opportunities. You go back to a loss against Lowell at home a couple of weeks ago. That one kind of probably stings. But in reality, this is a team that controls its destiny in Boston College. And these are 2 games that they're going to have to face against a very good, very hot Northeastern team.
Let's turn to the Big Ten, where there is another great race for the top going on. All 6 teams in action this weekend trying for position. They are all seeing how far up the standings they can get. And right now tied for the lead in the Big Ten are number 18 Minnesota and number 11 Penn State. The Nittany Lions host the Minnesota Golden Gophers in what is the last games of the regular season for Penn State this year.
Yeah, it's a little screwy. I mean, this is the unbalanced schedule that a 7-team conference provides. Somebody has to be off in that last weekend of the season. It's Penn State. So they are in a position that if they sweep this weekend, you're in an okay position to win a regular season championship. But if you either split or get swept, you probably can kiss it goodbye. Minnesota then, I believe, gets Notre Dame in their final weekend. Not a walkover. Trust me, I know that Minnesota has had some trouble over the years with Notre Dame. So it's interesting, just the fact that Penn State has to feel extra desperate because this is their last 2 games, knowing that Minnesota will play again next weekend. Also, and I know we're going to get to it, but Notre Dame playing Michigan this weekend, you can't overlook Michigan in this whole race for who's going to win the championship, because if these 2 teams cancel each other out with, say, a split this weekend, Michigan is able to sweep Notre Dame, then they could be in position to win this the regular season championship. It's such a great race right now in the Big Ten. I think this is what everybody hoped would happen when you had a 7-team conference with some very competitive teams and nobody able to run away with things. This is a great battle right down to the end.
And if you're Bob Motzko right now in your second year behind the bench at Minnesota, you've got to love the way your team is playing right now. It has been a steady climb from the beginning of the season, finally in the poll, finally in the rankings. The Gophers are playing their best hockey at the right time of the year.
They certainly are. And, it was not an easy start. And, when you're a guy like Bob Motzko, who, came from St. Cloud, where they had a lot of success under him, and, he's had great success at the international level, all of those things. You're sitting there saying at the beginning, what is going on? What do we have to do to build the confidence of this team up? What do we have to do to get some consistency? Whatever it was, they found it, because they are playing their best hockey right now. obviously they have a Big Ten race going on, but they also have an NCAA race where they, at this point, I have about 37% to make the tournament. If they keep winning and keep playing some pretty consistent hockey, I could see them getting into the NCAA tournament. That is not something that I think when the calendar turned to 2020 that a lot of people even thought was possible. So Gopher fans should be pretty happy with where this program has come over the last 2.5 months, and there's still some time to play some great hockey left.
The other two matchups in the Big Ten this weekend, number 12 Ohio State at Michigan State and Notre Dame at Michigan. The Wolverines coming off a sweep on Friday and Monday over Michigan State. And Notre Dame, a team that's got to be feeling quite desperate right now.
Oh, very desperate. I mean, this is a Notre Dame team that at one point, had high expectations. I'd almost say that they pretty much have to win the Big Ten to get into the NCAA tournament. But you just want to be in a position that you're playing good hockey going into the playoffs. Then you get a best of 3 series that at this point, it feels like it has a chance to be on the road. You never know, but it doesn't feel like it's going to be a home series. So you just get kind of strapped in to play good hockey. And this is a good tune-up. You're playing a hot Michigan team on the road. You never know. This could be a series that we actually see in a few weeks in a quarterfinal round game. But I do think that Notre Dame has to be playing more desperate. They just haven't shown that over the second half. Maybe this team doesn't have what Jeff Jackson's teams usually have, which is that confidence, which is that swagger, which is that ability to execute. They've never been a team that plays well from behind, but they also are a team that when you get a lead, they used to hang on to them with basically could just close out any game they had a lead. They haven't shown that this season.
Let's turn to the ECAC. A lot of top of the league versus bottom of the league, but I want to mention a couple of games. Friday night, number 20 Harvard at number 5 Clarkson. Never easy going to the North Country. Clarkson is playing well, and Harvard, after a hot start, has been maybe a little hit or miss since then.
Yeah, well, hit or misses, and there's been too many misses, really. I thought that this team heading into the second half was playing well. I saw them in January. I thought they were a great team, and have not really translated that into league wins in the second half. And they have to feel pretty desperate right now. They have to know that it's going to take a postseason championship likely to get into the NCAA tournament right now. But you want to give yourself the best position. Where are you going to finish? Are you going to finish in the top 4? Hopefully they will. They're in pretty decent position right now. But you also want to have some confidence going into that. And this is a tough weekend. You mentioned the trip to the North Country is never easy. Any team in the ECAC. But for Harvard, if they can go up there, pull off a sweep, get Clarkson and St. Lawrence, and take 4 points, there's your confidence builder that you need.
Number 16 Quinnipiac on Friday is at Rensselaer. RPI is having a fairly decent season, maybe exceeding expectations for head coach Dave Smith. Not his expectations, but everybody else's. But this is a big game if Quinnipiac wants any kind of a chance to catch Clarkson and Cornell.
And I think that's a stretch that they would catch them. But, you also want to solidify that home ice position, make sure that you're not going to be playing in the first round of the playoffs. And here you are going on the road to RPI and Union. And we point out this game. I just feel like RPI has been pulling off more upsets this year than maybe in the immediate years past. So they're a team you have to watch out for. I'm sure Rand Pecknell is telling his team that you can't sleep on this RPI team. Be dangerous to do that. So it'll be good hockey. I think that'll be one of the better hockey games of the weekend. And if Quinnipiac hopes to stay alive in every race that they're fighting for, including the NCAA race, they need to get a win on Friday.
In the NCHC, there's a great matchup. Number 4, Minnesota Duluth heads to number 19, Western Michigan. And don't let number 19 fool you about the Broncos. They were terrific at the beginning of the season, had a ton of injuries along the way. They're playing very good hockey right now, and that's a difficult place to go in and play.
It really is. And I think that that's what we forget is that, when you go on the road, there's always some factors that kind of take over. You always worry about officiating. You always worry about this and that conditions. But that is a tough building. That crowd gets on you quick. And I think that is one of the things that people forget about Western Michigan. You know, they're unbeaten in 4 right now, Western is, and we just talked about RPI and how good of a team that is. They kind of spanked RPI 8-4, 6-2. Then they went on the road, tied Miami, and lost the 3-on-3 overtime portion, but then they bounced back the next night with a 4-1 win. So I like the way they're playing right now. I look at it back since January 10th, they have just 1 loss. So this Western Michigan team has brought itself back to relevance. They will be a tough opponent for University of Minnesota Duluth this week.
The other game to look at is number 1 North Dakota at St. Cloud State. St. Cloud with a weekend off last weekend. Brett Larson's team is young, but they have done pretty well at home, including about a month ago, a weekend sweep at home over Minnesota Duluth. North Dakota has a chance to really almost salt away the NCHC, and they've already staked the top seed in the PairWise, and this just would add to that too.
Certainly, this is an interesting matchup. You mentioned St. Cloud, what they were able to do against Duluth a few weeks back, and that's going to be in everybody's head. If you're North Dakota, you take this team lightly, and you could get in a lot of trouble. St. Cloud, too, it's not like they're not playing for something. They're trying to get out of the road position in the first round of the NCAC playoffs. They have 3 weekends to make up enough ground. They're in 5th place right now. You get swept this weekend, it's going to be almost impossible to do, but you take some points. You take 3-4 points this weekend, and you're putting yourself in good position to maybe creep up into 4th place and host a first-round matchup, and that would be a huge coup for them. When you think of how poorly they started the season, the run that they've been on to get back into relevance, and now they're trying to maybe get into a position where they can get home ice in that quarterfinal round. That's worth playing for. That is a big target that's sitting in front for St. Cloud.
In the WCHA, it's a huge weekend for Bowling Green at home under first-year head coach Ty Eigner. They have Ferris State coming in for the weekend. Bowling Green desperately looking for that home ice in the first round of the WCHA playoffs. They need a sweep this weekend.
It's a must sweep when you really look at it, because you've only got 3 weeks left. You're sitting 6 points back. Now, 6 points back can be made up in one weekend when you have 3 points for a win. But you're also trying to make up some ground on Alaska. Michigan Tech is in between. So you've got, it's a difficult climb. Bowling Green, I think, had high expectations for themselves to be sitting in 6th place, not exactly where they wanted to be. So that is really an interesting race that we're looking at right there, home ice, and anything that's going to be done in terms of making up ground, it kind of starts this weekend. You've got to find a way to get a sweep.
Meanwhile, 2 teams that also need to hold serve this weekend. Number 3, Minnesota State, they are home against Alabama Huntsville. And number 13, Bemidji, has traveled to Alaska Anchorage. Those are really must for both of those teams, especially if Bemidji has any hopes of catching Minnesota State.
He also mentioned Bemidji, they're hoping to be in a race. And listen, Minnesota State is playing so well that it's going to be hard to catch them. Bemidji, hey, listen, they've given a good run. They have played some great hockey here down the stretch. You look at the other end, you mentioned Alaska Anchorage, and they're trying to hold position and make sure that they can even play in the playoffs. Don't forget, this is a conference that eliminates 2 teams. In Ferris State, they're only 1 game in back of Alaska Anchorage right now. So you look at some of these little races within races, and that's one that I kind of point to as well. Alaska Anchorage, they just want to stay relevant, and if both Alaska teams make the playoffs this year, I think that would be a nice statement. When you look at the kind of the state of their program and the fact that teams are walking away from these Alaska teams in Huntsville. To both of these teams to be able to make the postseason in the WCHA would be a statement. It would be statement making. That's what they really need to do, is make some statements right now.
When we turn to Atlantic hockey, 3 teams have already clinched a first round bye. One of those is first place AIC. They have home Thursday and Saturday against Holy Cross, and the Yellow Jackets can clinch first place in the regular season for a second straight year. With a successful weekend. Meanwhile, Sacred Heart is at Army, and there's a battle there, maybe even for second place. But, Jim, really the real battles in Atlantic hockey this weekend are these 2 series. RAT is home and home with Niagara. The Tigers can clinch a home first-round bye, and home ice and possibly get up as high as third on the weekend. Meanwhile, Robert Morris, which is looking for that top 5, has a pair of games at Canisius.
You know, and I think you look at both Niagara and Canisius, and both of these teams at times this year have been down, but both of these teams, when they play well, are very dangerous. So, you look at Niagara last weekend, getting just smoked in the first game against Sacred Heart and then coming back and winning 6-1 on the back end. You just don't know what you're going to get on any given night. So the point is if a team like Niagara or a team like Canisius puts things together for 2 nights, they're very dangerous. They both have enough talent to overtake any team on the course of a weekend. So when you're looking at the desperation that both RIT and Robert Morris have, trying to find a way to get into that 4th spot, the 5th spot, whatever it might be, these are 2 teams that stand in your way, and they're 2 teams that could be very dangerous.
When we turn to non-league action, 1 game, final weekend of the season, number 9 Arizona State at Wisconsin. A lot to play for Arizona State, maybe not as much for Wisconsin. Before we get into the details, I think there's one player on Arizona State who gets overlooked when you talk about players like Johnny Walker, who's had a lot of notoriety, or also this year leading that team and scoring, James Sanchez. And that's their senior captain defenseman, Brinson Pashnuk. He's one of 5 defensemen who are active in the NCAA with 100 or more career points. Had his first hat trick on senior night last Saturday. Kind of an undersized 5'10", 5'11" defenseman, undersized by traditional standards, but averaging a point per game. And when you think about players who are undersized and averaging a point per game, 2 of those from last year, Cale Makar and Quinn Hughes, are having successful NHL careers. So this is a guy who has really been kind of the heart and soul of this team and maybe doesn't get the mention. And just really wanted to call him out on this as the Sun Devils head up to take on the Badgers.
Yeah, really, really solid player. He's the prototypical offensive defenseman that we kind of see emerging a lot more in today's game. He doesn't have a huge size for the blue line, but he has that skating skill, and I like him a lot. I got to see him a couple of times this year, and he has skill. He has patience with the puck. He knows where he's going with the puck most of the time. He transitions so well. He's a good reason that this team doesn't play too much defense, because when he has the puck, he's able to really transition and move to offense. I like a lot of his game. You mentioned the hat trick last week. I was happy to see that for him. He's got a lot of talent. I know that on a team, when you have over the last couple of years that between great goaltenders with Johnny Walker and everybody else, it's easy to overshadow somebody like a defenseman, and Pashnuk is just too talented to overlook. He will get a look in professional hockey. His size, don't let his size fool you, because he plays a lot bigger than 5'10".
Well, and when you compare him to guys like Makar or Quinn Hughes, he's about 20 pounds heavier, so a little bit stronger there. Yeah, he's definitely going to be one of those free agent signings. But the games this weekend, Arizona State can clinch the NCAAs with a sweep this weekend. Wisconsin, really about all they can do on this is play the spoiler and maybe try to turn things around as they head into the last week of the regular season.
Yeah, that's what Wisconsin's really playing for. If you're Arizona State, 2 wins this weekend, you 100% lock up your NCAA hopes. That is my calculations on it. But 2 losses this weekend, and what right now is 95% chance of getting into the tournament drops down to 69%. So that's a pretty big dive. I mean, still, better than 2-to-1 odds that you're going to make the tournament, but then you're sitting there on conference tournament weekend and kind of counting wins, counting teams, trying to figure out who's in, who's out. It's much nicer just to be able to sit back and relax conference tournament weekend, knowing that you're in the tournament. And that's the position that at 2 wins this weekend, that's where Arizona State will be.
There's no better way to head into some time off than with the thrill of victory still ringing in your head. That's going to do it for the Game of the Week podcast for this week. We've been sponsored by the 2020 NCAA Frozen Four, April 9th and 11th in Detroit. For tickets, visit ncaa.com/Frozen4. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Game of the Week podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.